September 12, 1945, Fort McClellan, Alabama. The rope groaned against a wooden beam. Her shadow swayed in the amber light of a single bulb. 6 inches separated her feet from the floor. 6 inches between shame and release, between dishonor and redemption. Private James Williams burst through the barracks door. His knife flashed. The rope snapped. She collapsed into his arms, gasping, sobbing, her voice breaking into fragments of broken English. "Let me die, please, let me die." He steadied her trembling body, his young face drained of color, and whispered the only Japanese words he knew. "Daijobu, daijobu, it's okay." She looked into his eyes and saw not the demon she'd been promised, but a terrified boy trying to save her life. And in that moment, the carefully constructed lie she'd carried across the Pacific began to crumble. If this story moves you, help us keep these forgotten histories alive. Hit that like button and subscribe so more people can witness the uncomfortable truths that shaped our world. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Whether you're in Tokyo or Toronto, these stories belong to all of us. Your engagement ensures that the voices of those who suffered in silence are finally heard. Now, let's continue. Williams didn't see an enemy in his arms. He saw a human being drowning in unbearable pain. He carried her to the medical ward, her body impossibly light, her breath shallow and ragged, her eyes vacant as winter ice. The camp doctor examined the raw burns circling her neck like a crimson bracelet. He checked her pulse, listened to her lungs, asked questions through a translator she refused to acknowledge. Williams stood by the door, his hands still shaking, wondering what horrors could drive someone to choose death over American captivity. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that she and 46 other Japanese women had been taught for years that Americans were monsters in human skin. That capture meant torture, rape, humiliation worse than death itself. That surrender was the ultimate betrayal. That honor demanded self-destruction. Every day they spent at Fort McClellan, without violence, without cruelty, without the promised horrors, broke them more profoundly than any brutality could have, because it meant everything they believed was a lie. The women had arrived 3 weeks earlier, exhausted and terrified, convinced they were walking toward their execution. They'd been collected from scattered Pacific outposts after Japan's surrender on August 15, 1945. Some had been nurses. Others had worked as clerks, translators, or administrative staff. A few had been forced into comfort stations, a sanitized term for slavery. All had served the imperial military in some capacity. All believed they knew exactly what capture by Americans meant. The propaganda had been relentless and specific. American soldiers would parade them naked through city streets. They would torture them for information, then kill them slowly for entertainment. They would defile them, mock them, display them as trophies of conquest. Death was preferable. Death was honorable. Several women had attempted suicide during the voyage across the Pacific. Guards had stopped them. Now they sat in clean barracks in rural Alabama, eating 3 meals a day, and the cognitive dissonance was unbearable. Among them was Yoko, 23 years old, formerly a supply depot clerk in Manila. She kept a small notebook hidden in the folds of her dress. In it she recorded daily observations in tiny, precise characters. Day 4. They gave us hot water for bathing. I don't understand. Day 7. The food is abundant. My stomach hurts from eating. Why are they feeding us so well? Each entry ended with the same question, written in increasingly desperate strokes. What do they want from us? Yuki, a former battlefield nurse, struggled differently. She'd seen wounded Japanese soldiers left to die when medical supplies ran low. She'd participated in triage that valued some lives over others. She'd watched prisoners executed rather than treated because resources were scarce. Now she worked in the camp hospital, assisting American doctors who used penicillin freely, who fought to save every patient regardless of nationality, who treated German prisoners with the same meticulous care as American soldiers. The contrast was destroying her understanding of how the world worked. The attempted hanging on September 12th sent shockwaves through Fort McClellan. The woman's name was Yoshiko. She was 31, a widow whose husband had died during the Battle of Okinawa. She'd served as a translator at a military headquarters in Saipan. When the island fell in July 1944, she tried to jump from Marpy Point like hundreds of other Japanese civilians who believed American propaganda about enemy atrocities. A Marine corporal had grabbed her arm, pulled her back, probably saved her life. She'd been grateful at first, in the confused haze of survival. Then the guilt set in like infection. She'd survived when honor demanded death. She'd surrendered when duty required resistance until the end. And worst of all, her captors had been kind. They'd bandaged her cuts, given her water, spoken gently, treated her like a human being with dignity and worth. She couldn't reconcile it. The shame ate at her until she couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't meet the eyes of the other women. The rope seemed like the only answer, the only way to restore what had been stolen from her. Private Williams had been making evening rounds when he heard the sound. Not a scream, but a quiet choking, a desperate gasping that didn't belong in the peaceful Alabama night. He'd kicked open the barracks door, seen her dangling in the dim light, and acted on pure instinct. His knife sliced through the rope in one clean motion. She fell into his arms, surprisingly light, her body shaking with violent tremors. He'd expected her to fight him, to curse him for denying her chosen death. Instead, she went limp, whispering words he couldn't understand, tears streaming down her face and soaking into his uniform. He held her like she was made of glass, terrified she might shatter, and kept repeating the only Japanese phrase he'd learned from the camp translators. Daijobu, Daijobu. The incident sparked intense debate among the Japanese women. They gathered in tight groups, whispering, weeping, arguing in hushed voices. Some said Yoshiko had done the honorable thing, had attempted to reclaim her dignity through death. Others argued that survival was its own form of resistance, that living contradicted everything their captors might have expected. A few, like Yoko, wrote furiously in their notebooks, trying to process what it meant that the enemy had saved one of their own from herself. What did it say about Americans that they valued her life more than she did? What did it say about the propaganda they'd been fed since childhood? The medical examination revealed severe malnutrition, dehydration, and psychological trauma so profound the doctors had no framework for treating it. Captain Robert Harrison, the chief medical officer, sat with Yoshiko for over an hour, speaking through a translator. He asked about her physical health. She answered in monosyllables. He asked about her mental state. She turned her face to the wall. He asked what would help her want to live. She said nothing would, nothing could. Harrison was 54, a career Army doctor who'd treated shell shock in the trenches of World War I. He'd seen soldiers with typhus, civilians with radiation burns, prisoners of war with unspeakable injuries. But this was different. This was a woman choosing death over kindness, because kindness contradicted everything she'd been taught about her enemies. He realized then that America's greatest weapon wasn't its aircraft carriers or atomic bombs. It was this, the casual assumption that even prisoners deserved basic human dignity. He ordered round-the-clock supervision for Yoshiko. He moved her to a private room in the medical ward. He assigned Yuki to help care for her, hoping a familiar face and shared language might reach through the walls she'd built. And he did something unprecedented, something that would be remembered by every woman who witnessed it. He brought her a meal himself, not a nurse, not an orderly. The chief medical officer carried a tray of food into her room, set it on the table beside her bed, and said through the translator, "You don't have to eat it, but I hope you will. Your life has value." Even now, especially now, Yoshiko stared at him, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She looked at the tray. Rice, vegetables, a piece of fish, a cup of green tea. More food than she'd seen in months during the war's desperate final year. The man who'd brought it wore the uniform of her enemy. He'd spoken to her with something that sounded almost like respect. She didn't understand. She couldn't understand. The cognitive dissonance was physically painful, like her mind was tearing itself apart. Over the following days, the women began to talk more openly about their confusion. At night, after lights out, whispered conversations traveled through the darkness of the barracks. "They saved Yoshiko," someone said. "Why would they save her if they planned to kill us later?" Another voice replied, trembling with uncertainty, "Maybe they're waiting. Maybe this is all strategy, psychological warfare." But even as they spoke the words, fewer women believed them. The evidence was too overwhelming, the kindness too consistent, the care too genuine to be some elaborate deception. Yoko wrote in her notebook, her hand cramping in the dim moonlight. Week 4. Yoshiko tried to die. The Americans stopped her, fed her, gave her medicine. I watched Dr. Harrison carry her food with his own hands. Not a servant, not a guard. The doctor himself. In Japan, officers don't touch prisoners. Here they do. I don't know what this means. I don't know how to process it. But I cannot pretend I haven't seen it. Yuki spent hours with Yoshiko, checking her vitals, changing the dressings on her rope burns, sitting in silence when words felt impossible. Yoshiko finally spoke on the 5th day, her voice hoarse and barely audible. "Why did he stop me?" Yuki had no answer prepared. I wanted to die with honor. He took that from me. Yuki considered this carefully, then replied in a voice that trembled with the weight of what she was about to say. "Maybe he gave you something else, a chance to live without honor, to just live." The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Live without honor. In Japanese culture, in military culture, in everything they'd been taught since childhood, honor was worth dying for. Living without it was the ultimate shame, worse than any physical suffering. But here was Yuki suggesting an alternative, that survival itself could be enough, that life, even dishonored life, had inherent value. It was a radical idea, a dangerous idea, an idea that couldn't be unthought once spoken aloud. September faded into cooler October days, the shifting leaves stirring memories of home. The Japanese prisoners settled into routines that felt strangely humane, each meal and treatment undermining everything Imperial propaganda had taught them. The calm broke when Tomoko, a 42-year-old former teacher, fell ill. Her fever spiked, her breathing turned wet and shallow, and Yuki recognized pneumonia. With the ward overcrowded from an influenza wave, Tomoko lay on a floor mattress as the women prayed beside her. Whispers asked whether Americans would waste medicine on a prisoner. The next morning, Dr. Harrison knelt, listened, then barked orders. Get her a bed, penicillin, oxygen, now. The nurses scrambled to obey. An American soldier with a minor injury was moved to a chair in the hallway. A bed was prepared with clean sheets. What happened next was seared into the memory of every woman present, replayed in their minds for decades afterward. Dr. Harrison bent down and gently slid his arms under Tomoko's frail body. He lifted her carefully, supporting her head, taking her full weight as if she was precious cargo. He carried her across the ward, a white American officer carrying a dying Japanese woman, and laid her on the clean bed. He adjusted her pillow, pulled the blanket up to her chin, checked her pulse again. His movements were professional and practiced, but also unmistakably gentle, filled with a care that transcended duty. The entire ward had fallen silent, watching. Yoko began to sob. She pressed both hands to her mouth, but couldn't stop the sound from escaping. One by one, the other Japanese women started crying. Not quiet tears, but deep, racking sobs that shook their whole bodies. Dr. Harrison looked up, genuinely confused. "What's wrong?" he asked the translator. "What did I do?" Yuki tried to explain, but her voice broke apart. "You touched her. You lifted her. You carried her like she was. Like she mattered." Harrison frowned, still not understanding the significance. "Of course I did. She's my patient. Now, please step back so I can work." He turned back to Tomoko, beginning treatment as if nothing unusual had happened, as if what he'd done was the most natural thing in the world. But for the Japanese women, everything had changed in that moment. They'd watched an American doctor, an officer, an enemy, put his hands on a dying Japanese woman and carry her to a clean bed, not because he had to, not because it served any strategic purpose, but simply because she was a human being who needed help. That night, the barracks erupted in intense whispered conversation. The women couldn't stop talking about what they'd witnessed, analyzing it from every angle, trying to reconcile it with everything they'd been taught. "He touched her," someone kept repeating, as if saying it enough times would make it comprehensible. An enemy woman, worthless to him, and he carried her like she was precious. Another replied, her voice filled with wonder and confusion. "To him, she's not an enemy. She's a person who needs help. That's what we saw. That's what they believe." Yoko sat on her bed, her notebook open, her hand trembling as she wrote. "Today I watched an American doctor carry a dying Japanese woman to a hospital bed. He used his own hands. He didn't hesitate. He didn't show disgust or contempt. He simply did what needed to be done because she was a human being who required care." She paused, tears falling onto the page and smudging the ink. Then she continued, the characters becoming less precise as emotion overwhelmed technique. "In Japan, I watched wounded soldiers left to die in hallways because there weren't enough resources. I watched prisoners executed rather than treated. And now I have seen the enemy demonstrate a different value system, one that says a person is a person regardless of nationality, regardless of everything else." She paused again, her hand hovering over the page. "I don't know what to do with this knowledge. It hurts too much. It changes too much, but I cannot unknow it. I cannot pretend I didn't see what I saw. My entire worldview has been built on lies, and I don't know how to rebuild it. Tomoko survived. The penicillin fought the infection. The oxygen eased her breathing. Within a week, the crisis had passed. Dr. Harrison checked on her daily, adjusting her treatment, monitoring her progress with the same careful attention he gave all his patients, American or otherwise. Yuki was allowed to assist with her care. She learned to administer intravenous medications, to check vital signs, to adjust oxygen flow rates. Harrison taught her patiently, explaining each procedure in simple terms the translator could convey, treating her like a colleague rather than a prisoner. Yuki finally asked him one afternoon the question that had been burning in her mind for weeks. Why do you teach me? Why do you save her? We are your enemies. Harrison studied Yuki before speaking slowly through the translator. The war is over. In this hospital, there are no enemies, only patients and healers. I teach you because you want to learn. I save her because every life has value. I know what you were taught about us, but judge by what you see, not what you were told. Yuki bowed, tears falling, then whispered in halting English, "Thank you." "I understand." She walked away, changed. 3 weeks later, Tomoko addressed the women. "When fever crushed me, I prayed for death. But he carried me as if I mattered. In that moment, everything I believed collapsed. We were told the enemy was less than human, yet they've shown more humanity than those who claimed to protect us." The women had no answers, only the truth of what they'd lived. Yoshiko, once suicidal, now felt curiosity instead of despair. In spring 1946, the women learned they would be repatriated. Relief and fear tangled. What awaited them in a broken Japan? How could they explain the mercy shown by enemies? Harrison gave Yuki a recommendation. Private Williams told Yoshiko her life mattered. They left carrying nothing but altered identities. Japan's ruins stunned them. Yoko found her mother, who said only, "You survived. That matters." Years passed. Yuki became a nurse. Yoko a teacher urging students to question propaganda. Yoshiko built a quiet family life. In 1985, 12 survivors reunited. They agreed on one truth. Small acts of decency had reshaped them more than war itself. The rope Williams cut had severed not just despair, but the lie of dehumanization, replacing it with the harder, lasting truth our enemies are human, too.